I break my own heart every time I access what happened to me.
What happened to me, not what happened to Meredith.
You tell me in your own words what you were accused of and what happened to you.
What I was accused of is orchestrating a sex game murder.
Now, I've never really felt comfortable with the prosecution's version of the events. They called it a sex game gone wrong. It certainly wasn't a sex game in which Meredith would have willingly participated in. I do think some people were playing a sex game. I do think sex is a part of the dynamic. And I also think that Amanda Knox's word that she used there, orchestrated, is a very interesting word, especially in retrospect. Isn't what has happened since this crime has been committed also a series of orchestrations? Just think about the Amanda Knox media industry. It's almost a cottage industry that is orchestrated by her. Just think what a great job Amanda Knox has done at basically orchestrating her own PR. So much so that as a former murder accused, the correct answer to the question, what were you accused of, is I was accused of murder. Also, my boyfriend was accused of murder. Also, I was accused of slander, convicted of slander, and reconvicted of slander. But to reiterate, I do think that whole sex game gone wrong thing was a weakness from the prosecution's case. And so that's an area we need to address, the psychology. Have you ever figured it out?
To break it down to bare bones, I was accused of jealousy, of being jealous of one of my roommates, who was in turn sort of depicted as this overly prudish, repressed sort of a sexually, just very sexually prude person. Basically my exact opposite. I was depicted as one side of this stereotypical female spectrum of being this overly lustful, uninhibited female femme fatale type, and my roommate at the time being cast as this pure, virginal, withdrawn kind of female stereotype. And I was accused of this sort of incoherent, it was incoherent because the prosecution suggested that I both orchestrated a sex game that resulted in murder, but also it was a spontaneous sort of orchestration that I brought together in a moment's notice, a orgy of death.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, thoughts build up until...
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. It's very interesting the fact that Amanda Knox brings up the word jealousy herself. She's asked what happened, and she gives this long spiel, but somewhere in there, certainly when she expands on the whole thing, she brings up the word jealousy.
I was, to break it down to bare bones, I was accused of jealousy, of being jealous of one of my roommates.
Now, it's fascinating hearing Knox talk about Meredith because she doesn't actually mention her name, certainly not in that clip, doesn't actually mention her, and doesn't really have anything nice to say about her. She describes her how she's depicted, which is in kind of an unflattering way, and then she depicts herself as this femme fatale, which is quite a positive way to see yourself. And of course, the reality is Meredith had been in this music video, which Knox hadn't been. Meredith had 7 friends with her. Knox arguably had no friends, certainly no friends that were no American friends, apparently no English-speaking friends. And in the house, Meredith had a boyfriend. His name was Giacomo Salenzi, and Knox said that she liked him as well. Well, he chose Meredith. So actually there were a bunch of things to be jealous about. Another one was that Meredith was an Erasmus scholar, whereas Knox was just really doing a language course, I think, for a couple of weeks, and then that would have been it. I also think if you're going to talk about jealousy and you want to be superficial about it, have a look at what the downstairs roommate looked like, Giacomo Solenzi, and compare him to Raffaele Sollecito, who had never had a girlfriend before Amanda Knox. So, if you're talking about the word orchestration, just think about how Amanda frames things in quite a clever way. And above all, at the end of all of this, she speaks for the innocent. She's the spokesperson for the innocent. It's a very interesting, if you will, orchestration of the whole crime to come round to the other side and turn it into she's the victim. Is Amanda Knox the victim here, or is Meredith Kercher? And the part I played at the beginning, where she says, every time I go through this, I'm broken down again, sounds, and she looks very heartbroken when she says it, but she's literally choosing to executive produce something as well. So do you think that that is true, or do you think that those are words she's using that certainly sound appropriate?
I break my own heart every time I access what happened to me.
And yet, did you know that Amanda Knox narrates her own audiobook version of this? And I've done the same thing myself. I've also narrated audiobooks, and it's not easy. And so if she's breaking her heart every time she does that, why would she choose to do that? You can hire someone else to do the audiobook version. My sense of it is actually that Amanda Knox thoroughly enjoys, in an almost gleeful sense, but really almost as an actress, taking to the stage and being the center of attention. That's just my opinion, but I think we need to take the whole psychology narrative further. Don't you think it's time we did that? Now, in the previous analysis, we looked at Amanda Knox standing up. It actually made news headlines. For example, this one in the Telegraph. Amanda Knox makes courtroom declaration of innocence, right? And what prompted that? It was someone talking about, a friend of Meredith's talking about the contents of her, a vanity case, I guess, that contained condoms and a vibrator. And this caused her to stand up in court and kind of stand up for herself. And so what does this show us? It shows us the uninhibited Foxy Knoxy with boys now reveals herself right here to be equally uninhibited and show-offy in the courtroom. According to the Telegraph, quote, this is what Knox said, "It was a joke, a gift from a friend before I got to Italy. It was pink and shaped like a little rabbit. The rampant rabbit is a brand of vibrator. I'm innocent and I have faith that everything will be resolved." Imagine actually standing up in court, talking about your vibrator and describing it as well. Now, according to the article, prosecutors are likely to use the vibrator to suggest that Miss Knox, who called herself Foxy Knoxy on her MySpace page, that's another thing that has been twisted, that has been manipulated, that has been changed, that has been lost in the media narrative. Amanda Knox would say, I don't know why I've been given this name Foxy Knoxy, when she gave herself that name. And we knew this way back in February 2009. Now, though, a lot of that information has been lost, and so you can recast the narrative as, wow, they called me Foxy Knoxy, it's so unfair. They were making fun of me, they were belittling me. And so, when she says that she was precocious and adventurous, and this is a kind of myth that was foisted onto her, well, on her own Facebook page, as we've dealt with in the past, she described herself as having very few inhibitions. That was also how Meredith and her friends and her housemates experienced her. That was also how everyone experienced her in the Questura, where she was apparently doing yoga or something like that. And so here we see her again, this time in the courtroom, standing up and defending her use of whatever. Now, all three of these drivers, drugs, sex, and immaturity, when we talk about immaturity, we're really talking about the governing psychology. They not only individually worked in terms of this case, they weren't individual drivers, but they were compounding one another and agitating and aggravating with and against one another within a particular set of dynamics. So when Amanda Knox scoffs at the type of person Meredith was, and when she scoffs at the type of person she was cast at, we've got to be very careful to accept that, because although I think she's right about the sex game gone wrong thing, and also it being a spontaneous thing, and something that involved Meredith's cooperation, although that is silly, there is, I think, some truth in the whole jealousy narrative. And it almost seems to be that she's saying that Meredith was jealous of her. And I really don't think that that was the case. Because on Halloween, the night before the murder, Meredith had a great party. She had a night out with all of her friends and came home at something like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning after having a wonderful night out. Whereas Amanda went out basically on her own. I'm not even sure if Raffaele joined her for much of it, and then returned home early as well. So who was she partying with? And how did she feel about that? Because we do know that Amanda stopped communicating with Meredith for a period, and then just before Halloween resumed communication, which Meredith didn't seem to reciprocate. We know that Amanda, who was her housemate, wasn't part of them going out to Halloween. And as expats, you would imagine that she would be. And Halloween was a very big deal to Amanda Knox. It's something she said herself. So if we are to understand this whole process, this whole psychology, how do we do so? Because so far, how it's been done has been incorrect. So how do we fix that? I think we need to think about it in terms of individuation. And again, we must also think about all of this: drugs, sex, immaturity, and individuation within the context of the excesses and exuberance of being a student. And then also the excesses and exuberance of Italy. And I can tell you, put those two together. We were actually in Perugia on Halloween night, and there was a lot of exuberance in the air. Lots of people dressed up, a lot of people up and about at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I can tell you, I've traveled through Italy with friends and on my own, and there's a big difference. Guess what? On Halloween, the big party one day before Meredith's murder, guess who was deliberately excluded? One set of partygoers came back, as I said, about 5 a.m. Another solo partygoer was done by about 2 a.m. And so when Sophie diplomatically embraced Knox at the Questura, is it any wonder that Knox didn't hug Sophie back? To Knox, Meredith and her friends were her nemesis. Now you might say it's not the end of the world if you miss a party, but I think it is the end of the world when you're a student in that sort of situation, and it's quite a big deal type of event like Halloween. Especially, there's some people that really make a big deal of it. So if it's something that is a big deal to you and then you precluded from enjoying it, how are you going to feel? So just in that context, who would be jealous? Meredith or Amanda Knox? And so again, within this psychological field of individuation, where an individual becomes distinct, right? Distinguished from everybody else, but nevertheless belonging to a group in a sense. So you both independent and a separate entity, but in order to be whole, you also need to be integrated with others. I mean, we've all seen losers at a party sitting by themselves. That's not what we mean by individuation. Individuation is finding strength in who you are and then bringing that back to the group. And this whole conversation about individuation is really a conversation that Carl Jung wrote about in, for example, 2 essays on analytical psychology. He wrote, for example, individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. And did it feel like Knox could do that, given the British friends that she was surrounded with? Was she free to be who she wanted to be? Well, we see her in court standing up because she didn't like what was being said imposed on her, right? And so Jung also says we could therefore translate individuation as coming to selfhood or self-realization. And think about what that involves. The persona, ego, self at the center, but there's a shadow self. There's also animus. There's feelings of aggression and dislike to certain people that stand in your way. And so at the end of the legal epic, when Robin Butterworth learned that Amanda Knox had finally been acquitted, she was, according to her mother, devastated. According to one article, speaking at her Northampton home days after the couple were acquitted last Monday, retired French teacher Sue, 61, said, "When Robin was told they'd won their appeal, she was in tears. She couldn't believe it." That's Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito. If Robin found that hard to believe, that Knox had won her appeal, what do you think she thinks about Amanda Knox executive producing a series in which she emerges today as the heroine and the victim of the story? And how do you think Knox feels about Robin and Meredith's 6 other friends? How are they going to respond to the whole thing? 17 years later, how do you think Amanda Knox is going to think about that little group of 8 minus Meredith? I think possibly with a whole lot of satisfaction. Now who has the numbers on their side? 17 years later, Amanda Knox is still showing off literally by producing shows in which she has emerged as the star. Isn't that a kind of orchestration? So you're beginning to appreciate just how important individuation is as a driver, a conveyor, that was bringing certain things to a head in this particular case. Do you remember when you were in your last year of school or very early on in your university education or that sort of time of your life where you wanted to do something and someone said that you couldn't, or you were somehow limited in some way, what that felt like? It feels very different to what things like that feel like when you're an adult, when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond. Even so, it still feels extremely frustrating when you realize people have contempt for you and don't respect you. It's just so much more fraught when your mission at that age is to individuate, is to become who you are. I want to leave you with a little picture, a little anecdote from when I was in Rome. I was walking to the Colosseum, this time in the day and from a different route to another time. I was also by myself on this occasion, whereas on the other occasion I was with 2 friends. And so on this occasion I was in quite a narrow road and I was sort of trapped in this sort of group of kind of school kids, but senior school kids. And I couldn't really get past them, so I was sort of forced to walk with them. And I noticed how the guys were wearing earrings. Almost everyone was vaping. And someone would come by in a scooter, and this guy, the sort of tussle-head guy in front of me, would wave to some lady who was, or some youngster going by in a scooter. And you kind of got in that instant a sense of that's what's going on in these people's lives, that they are trying to establish themselves in their little societies, trying to show who they are. And you may remember when you were a kid that you've also got to show who you are. Some people do that by drinking. Some people do that by smoking. And you might say doing stupid things is stupid. But in terms of individuation, it's actually important to show that being part of a group is important. Now, personally, I would draw the line at things like smoking or getting drunk. But that's something you can't be dismissive of, is that individuation is very important, and doing silly things like jumping off a bridge is an important way to show that it is important for you to be part of a small little clique of people. The opposite is actually more worrying if you don't show any signs of being part of that. And that's where I think Amanda Knox casts Meredith in an unfair light, where she says Meredith doesn't even mention her name, but says Meredith was withdrawn and this and that. Meredith had 7 friends, and Meredith went out and partied on Halloween. And I would actually say Meredith sort of comes across as normal to some extent, whereas Amanda Knox comes across as crossing a line in terms of exuberance, which she still seems to do today, doesn't she? She still seems to cross a line in terms of appropriateness, doesn't she? Or is it appropriate to benefit again and again? I mean, she's been on Netflix and so on from being accused of murder. And whatever you say to that, what do you think Meredith's family and her friends say to that? Should Amanda Knox be able to and allowed to profit from telling the story again and again of how she was falsely accused of murdering Meredith? What do you think? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.